Thank you, Ben. I'll probably start with a little anecdote. Thank you, first of all, for turning up and coming. I've known Ben for a very long time, and he's always very, very energetic, very passionate about this industry, and it shines through everything he does. I was actually had the good fortune of one of my, as a young, ambitious, career-minded technologist at the time, I was invited down to a panel on a similar theme, connected TVs and technology. And Ben's opening question in the whole of the auditorium directed straight at me. You got to think of me about 10, 15 years ago. I was a lot younger then. Was Darren, for a man who works for a man who says that what they do is wrap tin around sand, what's the life of the set-top box going to be? And I'm pleased to say, that was often a question aimed at me and indeed Pace at the time. And here we are, still thriving, still being very successful. And so what I want to kind of discuss with you is the future of that set-top box and its role within what we call the smart home. Because what we've heard today from well, over the last couple of days from a lot of people in this industry, that technology is very, very alive and strong. Innovation is strong, and consumers, still want and value TV. They may not necessarily want it from the same original content producers, but they still want good TV in their living room. And so, if there's one thing I've learned this morning, and I think probably most of you here, is what FRAND acronym now means. For me, if you rewind the clock, only as long as a year, 2 years ago, the only thing people were talking about was Netflix. Now they're talking about Facebook, they're talking about Android, they're talking about Amazon, etc. And what that means to me is actually, that there's a lot of choice out there from different consumer content providers. And so what the set-top box and what our market has always done very well is it's been a great aggregator and provider of a seamless user experience to those consumers, but equally a point of integration for service and content operators to integrate into. And so the set-top box and indeed the gateway has still remained very, very relevant. And if you look again, we can't go throughout the conference without mentioning the new Apple announcement. Here is a company that for many years has refused point blank to export its technology onto anybody else's solutions. And now they are pivoting that strategy and looking to put technology and their service on other people's solutions. So again, it points to the fact that consumers do want video. Pay TV does continue to grow in certain markets, and yes, there is competition in more developed markets that's making it challenging. But consumers are still prepared to pay. And what's quite interesting as well is actually in many of those same households, consumers are paying for second and third services from other subscriber VOD services. So what we're starting to see is many of our customers ask us, how do we get those subscription VOD services onto our set-top box, onto our gateway? And that's been made possible, through paradigm changes in the way operators and technology vendors are providing software. We have open source frameworks now, such as Android TV, RDK, and others that make putting integration of applications and seamless porting of user experiences much more easier. And then what that means as well then is as a managed service operator on my set-top box, I can actually integrate a Netflix or an Android TV or an Amazon Prime video service alongside my BBC iPlayer, my Sky Now app, etc., etc. And so what I would argue is actually, yes, technology is enabling new entrants into the content market, but actually consumers still want an aggregated view of that content and be able to surf and manage their own content desires without necessarily having to subscribe to 5 or 6 or 7 different content providers. And then, should we sit on our laurels? Should we just sit there and say, okay, I can now offer subscription VOD to many different, to my consumers through my set-top box? The reality is there's also a need to evolve that thinking, because if you think as content are becoming a level playing field, if I'm a Comcast subscriber, I can get access to Netflix and YouTube, but equally if I'm a Charter subscriber, a competitor to Comcast, arguably in the US market, I can also get that same said content. You know, I need to start to widen out my services to offer new services going forward. And so I would argue that, you know, yes, subscription VOD now is becoming kind of mainstream and becoming much more easier to work with in the set-top box. But we also now, as operators and managed service operators, need to consider how do we evolve that thinking. As I was saying to my panel colleagues before we started, you know, if we were Apple and Tim Cook, and I stood here saying we've got all this new technology coming into the next iPhone, it'd be, you know, massive announcements, it'd make world press. You know, if I look at my own industry, at my own solutions, you know, I can see a tremendous amount of technology innovation and a confluence of technologies making new services possible. You know, if I look to the video part, you know, we've got ultra high definition UHD now. You know, that's becoming more the norm. If we look to broadband, the evolution to the gigabit home is becoming the de facto requisite for us to provide gateways and solutions into managed service operators' hands. And then likewise, if I look to wireless, you know, Wi-Fi is now moving to Wi-Fi 6. Regulators are looking at expanding the spectrum that's available to make Wi-Fi more successful. And then likewise, if I look to some of the other technologies that are coming through down the tubes, artificial intelligence, voice assistants, etc., they're all becoming the norm. And again, you know, if we look to some of the more successful set-top box solutions we have in the market today and the managed service operators offering there, they all have voice assistants on it. Sky Q, Comcast, etc., all have some form of voice assistance and technology. So technology innovations are healthy. This is a bit of a break from the set-top box in many ways, but it talks to then, okay, as a managed service operator, you know, I've got a set of services and applications I need to deliver to the consumer. I've got to orchestrate and control that and then deliver that over a particular network. I would argue that, you know, the set-top gateway still has very much the central point within the home as an always-on, as a trusted always-on companion for services into the home. And so I would argue that a smart media device is actually what operators are now starting to ask for. You know, most of my customers are now having conversations with me about putting voice assistants in there, considering what smart home devices they need to hook up to. You know, as with content, and aggregation of that said content is key for a successful service. What you see along the bottom here is a number of standards for connected home technologies and a number of file layer technologies that a service operator has got to navigate through to enable things like security or cameras or Nest type thermostats on their solution. And why would you want to do that? Because it creates stickiness. It reduces churn. As soon as a consumer moves to you for broadband, for video, and then also gets all of their services around that wrapped up in one bundle, they are less likely to move to another provider. And as an operator, having the eyeballs on your service, owning that HDMI 1 port is key to your future success. And so in summary, you know, I think the opportunity does exist for the smart home. You know, it's clear from market studies and from what we've seen over the last couple of days that consumers are still prepared to pay for video. You know, video quality itself and the content variability and sources is increasing, which is, again, is opportunity for a managed service operator. But equally, that there is opportunity to evolve those services to a smarter home. You know, and I would argue that, you know, the paradox here is most consumers would pay for managed service home services, but the problem is they have a lack of trust in some domains with consumer enterprises, whereas they do trust, you know, telcos and managed service operators such as BT in the UK, for example. So, you know, ensuring we maintain that same kind of philosophy with our, you know, as we evolve the box and the gateway with speed and security and device control and management, you know, I think there is continued life and success in the set-top box and gateway yet. Thank you.